Oh, it's been far too long. Welcome everybody to Marsh and Mello, which Kyle Melo told me at the Tiger Cats game when I saw him last weekend, that you asked Chat GPT to define TSN 1150 Hamilton for you, the origin story of this show. Yes.
I did. We were called premier hosts of the network, and it said we had two different shows, the Morning Scrum and Martian Mellow. Little did they know it was the same show.
Yeah, that's awesome. We did both of them according to the computers. So thank you, computers, for knowing our lives inside and out.
By the way, uh, it's been so long now, so I think we could peel the curtain back. And if there's any backlash, I take it all on myself since I am no longer an employee of Bell Media and TSN. Um, the reason why our show name was The Morning Scrum with Martian Mello
Yep.
was kind of as a safe keep. So no sports show in the GTA or anywhere else in Canada could take that name because it was already taken. Well, we've been off the air for a hot minute. Has anybody used the name Morning Scrum?
Yeah, we were actually called the Morning Scrum, and then we just unofficially called ourselves, well, let's just call it Marshmallow. And our programming director and our station director, Mike Neighbors, was like, yeah, just call yourselves Marshmallow. It's fine. We just legally, we have to keep that name, the Morning Scrum, so nobody can copy it. It's kind of like how Labatt Blue owns the naming rights to, it's the reason why that beer is called Belgian Moon. I believe in Canada because it's actually Blue Moon, but it's also Rickard's White, just packaged differently. I don't know. It's all very confusing to me, but it's all just dumb legal stuff. So yes,
It is.
I am happy to be here with Kyle. We are going to be breaking down for you the Johnny Manziel documentary. The reason we wanted to do this, Untold Johnny Football on Netflix now. If you want to go ahead and watch it for yourself, maybe even actually watch it before you listen to this. I like to do that personally when I listen to kind of like movie review podcasts and things like that. So I'll put that on the front end that maybe you'll want to watch it on Netflix and pause it and come back to us here later. But we wanted to do this because obviously there's a CFL connection, and Kyle and I were at TSN 1150 in Hamilton when we were the rights holders. When Johnny Manziel was, of course, a Hamilton Tiger Cat, and I was doing play-by-play for radio when he was in Hamilton and Montreal. So I thought it'd be great to get back together and talk about some of that because we've been crossing paths when we're down at Tim Hortons Field and we see each other as I'm doing some games down there. We'll get to the CFL connections of this and like what it meant and all the rest. But for the first little bit, I do just actually want to focus on the documentary itself, the way that things were covered. The first thing I'm always cognizant of whenever I'm viewing a documentary is who has final say on these things. Like, what is the messaging? Is it Manziel that gets to make the final call or is it not? And what made me aware of this a lot was basically The Last Dance, which I think is one of the best documentaries ever made. But Michael Jordan had the final say on everything. Like he was essentially an executive producer. It was a 10-hour Jordan commercial. And it's friggin' sweet because Jordan getting to make a Jordan commercial turned out to be amazing. But as I was watching this, I was trying to determine, okay, like is Johnny having the final say on this stuff? Is this the real honest truth? Scale of 0 to 10. How close do you think we got to the real God's honest, no filter Johnny Manziel truth about his journey?
About a 2.5.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't think we found out anything about Johnny. Actually, here's my thing. Did we find stuff out about Johnny way back when? I think we did. Do we know anything about Johnny Manziel today and what
Right.
he's doing post football? Goose egg. I know nothing about Johnny and his life moving forward. I know listening to interviews. That documentary, I thought the end was kind of rushed. But that was just me. You can tell that Johnny is still not very careful, but about what he's saying, about how he's portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to be portrayed in the light of he was a talented football player, which he was. I'm not taking anything away from Johnny Manziel, but the aura around Johnny, um, I saw that documentary and I thought to myself, I can see how it all fell apart. I
Oh yeah.
definitely can see that. Not just with Johnny, with the people that he was surrounding himself with.
100%. Yeah. I mean, like all of his buddies, but this is the funny thing, right? One of the main threads that runs throughout the documentary is him being surrounded by a crew of people who were just yes men, who are going to do anything to try and help him
Mm-hmm.
break the rules. And that includes his family, because oh my God, his dad, we'll get to that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
but when I see him being surrounded by a group of like yes men, the only thing they show of Johnny now, which I know the point of the documentary was more so about like his football life and then like, oh, wherever he is now, he's just kind of done with football, is how they framed it. But all they show of him now is just drinking beers in Scottsdale. Like they kept 3 or 4 different times they would cut back and it would be him in present moment just crushing beers, and there's like these super slow-mo shots of him like, doing chugging beers with his boys in Scottsdale. And I'm like, hey, I'm not here to vilify that, but also it's kind of like the whole thread of the thing is you surrounded yourself with the wrong people and you were just out partying. And then they show shots of him now, and he's surrounding himself with a bunch of dudes that look like him, and he's in his backyard in Scottsdale just partying. And I'm like, he hasn't changed at all.
No, and that's my whole point, right? Like, what do we know about Johnny moving forward? We know very little. Did we even mention of where he is in his sobriety journey? None. By the
Pretty
looks of it, he's
obvious
still
that,
getting hammered.
yeah,
The
pretty
first
obvious.
scene of the documentary, his buddies are at his house and they're like chugging stuff. And I'm like, what is happening? Where am I? Texas A&M?
Yeah. And again, this is the interesting thing too, right? Is Johnny is, for as much of a mess as his life has been, he is somebody who has made shrewd business decisions, as we'll get to the autograph stuff that they talk about in this documentary as well. And like I saw that he's opening a bar across the street from Kyle Field called Johnny Footballs, like at this football season. And I'm like, so he's probably got like a business manager at this point. And one of the interesting things in this documentary was when his Eric Burkhart, the agent, said, listen, Johnny, do you want to be a first round quarterback? Or do you just want to be famous? Because you have to make a decision. Like, you're already famous. We can make you super famous, but you're not going to be a first round quarterback. Or we can try to make you a first round quarterback. And I mean, so many things happen in this doc that, again, hopefully we'll have time to get to it all. But it's like he tried to kind of half-ass do the I want to be the first round quarterback and be the guy. But as Cliff Kingsbury and different people said in the documentary, he was never really that dude. He couldn't really do it. And now he's just turned towards, I have a business manager, I have my name, image, and likeness, and I'm going to profit off of it as much as I humanly can by lining up Netflix documentary, opening a bar at Texas A&M, like whatever is coming next. He's basically going to become, it seems like in his future, Pete Rose, like sitting outside of casinos and writing autographs for people for massive amounts of money just based off of the lore of who he was, not who he is or what he even became. It's funny, man. Like, he's living in infamy and he's profiting off of it in a way that it really makes me, as I was watching it, I kept looking back on 2018 in Hamilton and Montreal. And I just kept thinking, like, man, we were right smack in the middle of him getting diagnosed as bipolar and still probably going out in Montreal and partying and all the rest. And I'm like, and we were trying to cover it as well as we possibly could with the Tiger Cats, but it was like, man, did we have the blinders on? Like, were we being fed all the information of, yeah, Johnny's trying really hard and all the rest, and we thought it was the truth for a while? It's made me reassess watching this documentary the way that I covered him in person when he was in the CFL.
Well, there's a couple of things here. There's omissions from the documentary that they don't touch on. The assault allegations against his former girlfriend. They didn't really touch on it. They touched on it a little bit, but then immediately like moved on. That's my whole thing with the documentary is every time they brought up a point, they just rushed through it to get to the next point. And I thought to myself, was that Johnny saying, I don't want to talk about it. Let's move on, or this is too deep for me. Like, for example, Burkhart dropping the line of, I heard the fourth string quarterback at Texas A&M was doing the piss test for him. And I'm just like, wait a second.
Right.
Do we get the reaction of the fourth string quarterback from Texas A&M? By the way, I didn't waste time trying to look it up and who it was.
Yeah, that's true. I have no idea who that would have been, but I think he has clarified. I haven't listened to the full Lebatard interview that we played for people at the start here, but I caught most of it. I believe in that interview he clarified that wasn't a thing. But again, why am I supposed to believe that?
Oh yeah,
because let's be real about this. If he was potentially failing drug tests, didn't Reggie Bush have his Heisman Trophy taken away after the fact?
Well, that was the whole thing with his somebody bought his mother a house because they were using Reggie Bush kind of as a ploy for autographs and all that stuff. They were doing a bunch of marketing stuff with Reggie Bush when it was super taboo. Like, you weren't allowed to do that. When Johnny came around, it was kind of like, this is stupid. These guys should really make their own money. And now it's like, it's open sesame, baby.
Yeah, I mean, it's craziness right now. One of the things I took away was obviously how far ahead of his time he was in just basically having a bone to pick with Mark Emmert in the NCAA, where he's like, you guys are making so much money off of me. And I'm somebody who, as I was watching that documentary on Johnny, I'm thinking back to the Pony Excess, right? The ESPN 30 for 30. I'm thinking about Eric Dickerson taking the gold plated Trans Am from Texas A&M when they were in the Southwest Conference and then not going to A&M and keeping the car because what the hell else was A&M going to do? Go, hey, we gave him a car and he didn't come to our school. They're going to be like, wait, you gave him a car? You're not allowed to do that. Like they were going to call
Hmm.
themselves out. So like players were leveraging this way back in the 70s and 80s. And yeah, Johnny was one of the first people that I can think of. I mean, obviously Ed O'Bannon is what everybody references as kind of the turning point in the NCAA of, hey, name, image, likeness being used in the NCAA video games. We should be able to make money off of this. But as I was watching it and I saw $37 million in free publicity for Texas A&M when he won the Heisman Trophy in 2012. And then the thought crossed my mind, and I'm sure there's got to be some great article out there from somebody who can do the adjustment based on the era and the year and the income and the current salaries being made, because that's really what they are with the NIL deals of the top quarterbacks in football in the NCAA. What would Johnny's number have been?
Oh,
How would you even put a number on what his value would have been in NIL back in 2012 and 13?
it was hundreds of millions of dollars. I believe that. He changed College Station. Remember, that was the first year going into the SEC, Johnny's freshman year, and they didn't know if they were going to be competitive. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, they were beating Alabama. Like it was Johnny time, and it kind of faded over time where you realized, oh, this guy has some personal troubles that are going to stay with him his entire career. And then it went out with him in college, and then it came back in the NFL. And then obviously the documentary gave a behind the scenes aspect of that situation. I think one of the numbers, and I have it here, when you told me yesterday, hey, you want to do a podcast on the Manziel documentary, I said sure. So I was taking notes kind of during the podcast or during the documentary,
Yeah.
just the certain numbers that would stick out to me. And there was one here. Texas A&M Foundation received $750 million. Johnny's Heisman year, that was $300 million more than any previous year. Like that's the difference of Johnny Manziel. Boosters that were out of the picture because they're like, we're not that good. And then Johnny comes around and they're calling, hey, I want a box.
Yeah.
Wait, we haven't heard from you in 11 years. Here's $25 million. Oh, you want a new building? Yeah, I'll add on to that building. And that's the difference of college football and what sports can do for faculty, students, infrastructure at the university. It's pretty alarming because it went on for a very long time of just people making money off of these kids' backs, and nothing was being done about it. Obviously, topic of mind is Johnny Manziel, and I'm thinking back, I'm like, man, can we do a documentary on Tim Tebow? Because
Well,
that was crazy and it lasted longer.
I believe they are doing a Netflix documentary on Tim Tebow and the fact that he was like the savior that was surrounded by all of the criminals with the Florida Gators. And
Yeah.
they're actually doing something on that. But that's actually something interesting too that I was thinking about while watching this is very much the same way that the 1 week news cycle has become 1 day and the 1 day news cycle has become 1 hour. Things come and go, and it's just like boom, it happened, move on to the next thing, next thing, next
Mm-hmm.
thing, because people are constantly searching in your feed to find the newest news. This is the type of story, it struck me while I was watching it. It feels like we shouldn't be telling already. Because to your point earlier about like what is he now? Like this story is so incomplete. He's so young. Like you can look back on it, but it's still kind of fresh. Like these are the type of stories that we used to wait 15, 20, 25 years to be able to create, but now you're seeing like, and maybe this is just me getting older, I'm seeing documentaries coming out on sports moments that I lived. And I'm like, I used to watch like, June 17, 1994. And I'm like, I gotta watch this. I've always
Mm-hmm.
seen the White Bronco stuff, but I don't really know what happened with OJ that day. And you watch it and you're like, oh shit, that is crazy.
Yeah.
But now you're seeing like the 2000s Ravens, the greatest defense of all time. And it goes into all the crazy stories about them, Ray Lewis and Ed Reed. And I'm like, dude, I was 9. I remember watching them. And as I'm watching this Manziel thing, my personal connection, I also obviously wore number 2 for a school that had similar colors. And I had a white face mask like Texas A&M, and I wore a clear visor like Johnny. And there was times where I would wear like a half sleeve like John. I literally wanted to look and feel and act and run around like Johnny Manziel. Did I have the athleticism? Never. But I was just playing dress up because it was fun. Because Johnny was cool. He was the coolest thing in the sport, pro, amateur, whatever. And seeing the way that he swaggered around and had so much fun playing the game, I would play or be a backup at McMaster, depending on the year, 12, 13. I would see him on the schedule. Texas A&M is playing against, for example, Alabama. the game that they detail, of course, the upset in Tuscaloosa in his first year in 2012. I forget who we were playing that day for McMaster, but I saw it on the schedule, and I distinctly remember finishing our game and like not really talking to anybody on the team and getting on my bike and like exit stage left, basically riding my bike as hard as I possibly could home because it was a 4 p.m. kickoff for Bama against Texas A&M and
It
Johnny
was the
Manziel.
CBS afternoon game.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
the late slot on CBS, and I was like, I'm not missing this. I don't
Yep.
care if I have my own football life that's going on. Like I had to get home, watch Johnny. That's how crazy it was. Like a kid in Canada is like bailing home as quickly as possible, who is a quarterback in university, to watch that quarterback play for his university. It's like when I think back about that, I'm like, that's amazing. I played a game against Waterloo where I played pretty bad, but it was in 2013. I didn't play to the level I liked. I was really angry at myself. I forget what the stat line was, but it wasn't good. And I remember finishing the game and doing the same thing, bailing out. I went down the back tunnel at McMaster underneath the stadium, grabbed my bike, boom, gone. Didn't do media, didn't see my teammates, like didn't even shower, like took off my pads and went home
Mm-hmm.
because I had to watch Johnny. And like, that's the insanity of this whole thing.
And by the way, you're not alone in that. I've heard the same stories about LeBron James,
Yeah.
where you had Cleveland Cavaliers players before LeBron ever played for the Cavs, who was playing at Akron. His high school games were on ESPN, and you would look in the front row and see like Drew Gooden, who is like prime with the Cleveland Cavaliers,
Yeah.
and all these guys because they had to see the next great thing. Now, I'm not saying anybody thought Johnny Manziel was going to be to the level of LeBron James.
Right.
Johnny was good, but Johnny needed kind of the right system in order to be successful. That was something else that kind of irked me a little bit about the documentary, is when Johnny said, and he has said this in the past as well. He said, "Well, I never had the right system, or I never had the right culture around me." And I was thinking to myself, that might be true for success. First off, it's the Cleveland Browns. They haven't had success in forever, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, that's ultra success. But I look at it as you could have been a 5-10 year player in the NFL. That's on you. That's not culture. There's
Yep.
a lot of quarterbacks out there that are, even in the NFL, that are bad, but they've stuck around. Whether they're borderline starters or whether they're, backup quarterbacks, who, when they step in, can do something and help a team win. Look at Chad Henne.
Yeah.
Like, dude sat in Kansas City being the backup to Patrick Mahomes, and Mahomes goes down in the playoff game. What does he do? First drive that he's in, touchdown. Like, those guys are professionals, and Johnny was never that. I think Johnny loved being the center of attention. I think he hated the limelight, and I think those are different. Because the limelight, you get scrutinized. Attention, it's only the positives that people look at. I mean, you can bring the negative aspects of it, but that's not because of your performance. Johnny Manziel didn't play in the NFL for 5 years or 10 years because he wasn't talented enough. He was definitely talented enough, but he brought all that extra with him. And I mentioned Tim Tebow before. Tim Tebow's kind of in the same boat, but for the complete opposite. Everybody loved Tim Tebow so much. He was everybody's savior.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted the attention of a backup quarterback taking all the air out in the room. So that's why he didn't stay in the NFL for long. Could he have been a second, third string quarterback for 10, 15 years? Hell yeah.
Yeah, he could have middled his way through the league and found jobs and plucked away and played a role. And yeah, but too much attention, too much heat. It's amazing when you look at Johnny's timeline. Again, we'll get to the CFL connections on this in a second, but Cleveland Browns 2014-15, right? So he freshman year 2012 at Texas A&M, then he wins the Heisman, first freshman to ever do. So 2013 he goes back. It's a total shit show. He ends up leaving school because he's like, I got to get the hell out of this place. This sucks. It's always a bad idea when your life is out of control to accelerate. Like, as a general rule, when your life is out of control, don't press the gas and go, you know what I should do? My life's out of control. Instead of going back for another year and getting my life right and being prepared to put my foot down on the throttle, I'm just going to put the throttle down as hard as I can right now, and I'm going to go to the NFL. That's what he did. And I think that had a significant change in the way that he ended up acting with the Browns as well. But he's with the Browns for 14-15, gets let go. There's the 16-17 dark period, and then it's, of course, the CFL connection. We'll get to that in a second. But the thing I wanted to point out, there's a couple of moments in this documentary that really jumped out because I did the same thing, Kyle, phone in hand, taking notes as it was going on. Mm-hmm. I think Kevin Sumlin's, just when I think about the mystique of Johnny football, Kevin Sumlin's freshman rule on media I've never known about that, and I think that that really helped build up the mystery of this like little white guy running around tearing up the SEC as a freshman, and he doesn't speak to the media because Kevin Sumlin put that rule in where you couldn't talk. The only thing he did was before the Heisman, and he came out and he was quirky and charming, and I was like, man, I'd never considered that before. But in terms of building the lore of him, when you don't talk, like think about Colin Kaepernick. Since he left the NFL, he went through a long period, obviously a lot of different circumstances, but he went through a long period where he just didn't talk. He didn't say anything. And it was like the less you talk, the more people wonder, who are you? What are you doing? Like they get curious. The interest level goes up. Whether that was strategic or not by by A&M and Sumlin, I'm not sure, but I found that to be an interesting moment. Another one was his dad blaming Texas A&M because he said, you know, when you come from Tivy in Kerrville, Texas, where it's basically a military institute and everybody has to dress the same and act the same and practice the same and hold to the same standard. He's like, you know, when you give your son to an institution, I don't know what the exact quote is. Maybe I'll be able to find it and throw that clip in here. But when he says you go to an institution, you expect them to take your son and to build character and morals into him. I'm sitting next to my girlfriend watching this. She goes, no, that's your job, Dad.
Yeah. So I put the same thing in my notes about the dad's comment. I
Yeah.
don't have the exact quote here, but right before that, when he talked about the coaching staff and the fact that, oh, they're supposed to, you know, take your son and turn him into a good young man.
Right.
Right before that, he said his son was never held accountable and he blames the coaches. And then I was thinking to myself, okay, all this enabler stuff, I can see where it comes from now.
Yeah.
Because how dare you blame a coach for, and again, I'm going to put this as kindly as I can, raise a jackass, give him to a coach, and then he comes out a jackass, and then you blame the coach. And it's like, no, he didn't fix him, but he didn't break him.
No.
That's on
No.
you. Like he
Yeah.
was the same self-centered guy stepping into Texas A&M as he was in Kerrville, Texas, and it just all came to a steam when you threw money and fame in there.
Yeah. And when you see the behind the scenes stuff of him going out and making money, signing autographs and going to sit courtside and do all these things, again, it makes me reassess when he came into Hamilton and the first time that he had a media availability, he was wearing a Wheels Up hat. You know what Wheels Up is for anybody out there that doesn't know when you're watching College Game Day and they say, well, today's celebrity guest picker is presented by Wheels Up. It's a private airline. It's you book the planes, they fly you from point A to point B. It's a PJ, it's a private jet. And Johnny showed up and did his media availability, not in a Ticats hat, not in CFL, not in A&M, not in Browns, not in NFL. He was wearing like, yeah, I came here on a private jet. I got this hat from some guy. He probably partied in the hat the night before. He had media availability for all we know when he got to Hamilton, whatever. It's like, but this was one of those things that I really realized. It's like you see the thread line. Basically, the second he leaves Kerrville, he leaves the construct that allows him to be under control. You can see the deterioration immediately. Like he's on campus as a freshman, he's in trouble. Then the trouble begins when he's on campus and he's being a celebrity. Then he just leans into it. He goes in the NFL. He decides to create more trouble. Then he tries to create so much trouble, he gets himself kicked off of the Cleveland Browns, which he successfully does. He doesn't care about getting back to the team on a Sunday because he's partying in Vegas on a Saturday night and he misses all the
That was
flights.
crazy.
He misses all the flights and he's like, fuck it. I'm just going to go hard tonight. It's like,
Yep.
what? When he says that in the documentary where he's like, I looked at all the flights, I couldn't make any of them, and I just decided, screw it. I'm not going back to Cleveland. It's like, how does somebody not that's with you go, Johnny, what do you mean you're not going back to Cleveland?
Yeah.
There's a game tomorrow. You're on the active roster. You can't just decide I'm not going back to Cleveland. Like, but all of these things carrying all the way through into the CFL and into after the CFL. And now like it's all the same guy. It's all the same guy. All of the behavior is the same. The acts are different. The behavior is the same. That was my main takeaway from all of this.
Yeah. And obviously being around Johnny for a short amount of time in training camp, and I didn't have, a lot of discussions per se with Johnny. But there was this aura around Johnny, and maybe I'm wrong in this. All the Ticats players were saying the right things. He just never fit in.
Yeah.
I always felt like he was on an island when he was here in Hamilton. And there's nothing to say that that wasn't the same thing in the NFL, where, and he talked about it too. He wasn't having fun anymore. And you could see him, warming up in training camp. And, you know, there's four quarterbacks for the Cleveland Browns, and Johnny would throw a pass, not even say a word to the other quarterbacks, and like just walk back and just so leisurely be distant from the rest of his teammates. And I
Yeah.
thought to myself, maybe that wasn't the same Johnny as Texas A&M, but he does mention in the documentary that football wasn't fun anymore.
Right.
And maybe the fun of football kept him engaged enough where he could feel like he was a part of the team. And then the second that disappeared, the rest of it crumbled, where you could be playing as poorly as you can on a football team. You have to stick with your teammates, because if you don't, and all of a sudden they kind of put you away on an island, it's only a certain amount of time until everything breaks down.
Yeah, and I like to be fair, we were in and around the locker room a pretty decent amount when Johnny was with the
Mm-hmm.
Cats, and I could never get a real tell. Like, was he accepted by everybody? Was it just all like a big show? Were they genuinely taking him in? Did they have zero belief that he was going to be with them for longer than a month or two? Like I still don't know. And maybe if
Mm-hmm.
Ticats players see this or guys that were around the team, I'd love to know in all honesty, because I could never get a read on it. Like, I was never confident enough to be like he didn't fit in, but I also never get the sense that like, oh yeah, this is working out perfectly. And
Yeah.
that, like, one of the things I think that a couple of things jumped out to me on this was Dave Naylor tweeting out after the documentary came out that one of his favorite Manziel memories with Hamilton was when he stayed behind and didn't join the team on their way home after the Hamilton preseason game in Montreal, which we broadcast because it was Formula One weekend in Montreal. Now that you see the documentary and the bills up to his ear because he's holding $10,000 in cash and all the rest, Formula One in Montreal, the Grand Prix weekend, that's a marquee ass event, man. Like, it's expensive to get in. It's pricey. It's every bar in Montreal has got everything you would ever want in your life. That weekend is Johnny football.
Mm-hmm.
Like Grand Prix weekend there. For him to stay behind afterwards, hey, I did the same thing. I went to the race the next day. I was watching qualifying while I was calling Johnny playing football, like on the radio, because we had RDS in our booth and we were watching qualifying happening because we could see Circuit Gilles Villeneuve off in the distance. So I get why, but it's like that's one of those moments where I go, like, was he ever really in?
Oh yeah.
Did,
I,
did he
I
ever really want?
100% agree with that. Um, you know, pulling the curtain back we did our show from training camp from McMaster
Yeah,
every day, and we were there at 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. But actually we were there longer. We would walk from the cafeteria where we're doing our show,
right.
where the Ticats would have breakfast, and then we'd walk to the stadium. And I would get there at 5:30 in the morning. So I used to always park right where the doors are to the stadium. So because the cafeteria was right across. So I always have the best parking spot because I was the first one there.
Right.
So I'd park there, and then whatever, we do our show, go to training camp, and then do media. Whatever it finished, 1:30 in the afternoon. And then I go back to my car. And all while this whole Johnny Hoopla is happening, we keep hearing, man, Dane Evans never leaves. He's just like study, 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 always study, always study, always study. And I would go to my car to go home, and Johnny's across the parking lot getting in his car going home. And I'm like, wait, the backup quarterback, nobody shuts up about how he just studies nonstop. And Johnny, who's supposed to be getting his football career back, he's taking off right away.
Yeah.
And I don't know the circumstances around it, but it was every day.
Yeah,
It was every single day.
but this was also me trying not to read too much into it. His very first day at training camp, I'll never forget, in Hamilton. He's signed, he's done the press conference. I go to the camp, like McMaster's Field on the Monday, and Johnny walks in sweatpants when there's already guys in pads out on the field. And internally, like externally, I'm like, whatever. I don't want to make a big deal about this and go on.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Manziel was 15 minutes late this morning to his first practice. But internally, I was going, Like I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of stuff we've heard about. I'm like, this doesn't look great. If I was him, maybe I would try to be a little bit early just to send a message. But I'm like, that's not who he was. That's not who he is. For a lot of people, I think, and we've only got like 8 minutes left here, but for a lot of people, I think they look at, why wasn't the CFL in this documentary? That was the complaint from a lot of CFL fans on social and all the rest. And I had the same thing where I was like, oh, I wish they would have covered more of like his journey up
Yeah.
here and like what the battles were and stuff. But in reality, if they do that, they would then have to also cover the AAF and they would have to cover the fan controlled football league. It's like, I don't think Netflix wanted to cheapen the product of this documentary. Even if they would have put 30 seconds of montage in of him playing in a variety of leagues, I don't know what purpose it would have actually served because the damage was already done. We were just the leftovers. And the biggest thing I came away with after watching him talk about his mental health and his drinking and wanting out of Cleveland and hating the game and totally being despondent, why the hell did he come to Canada? That was my biggest takeaway. Seeing all of that, I'm like, by the time he came to Canada, in hindsight, watching this documentary, it was over. There was
Yeah.
no path back. There was no reconstructing of the myth and the lore. He was an extremely talented football player trying to get by on all talent, no work, and just hoping that he would come up here and it would turn into somehow an NFL opportunity again. And I'm like, when I watched where he was at that point in his life and he came up here, now that I see it through his eyes and through the length of his journey from high school to the CFL, I can't believe he came to Canada. It doesn't make any sense. There was no point. He was not getting back to the NFL.
Yeah. I feel like all the stages of Johnny's football career, it was less of a Johnny than the previous one. Like college football, he comes in, he's energized, wants to prove himself, boom, takes off. And then everything else starts and kind of after his Heisman year. And then second year, maybe not so good. Gets in trouble, gets suspended for a half. Stupid.
Yeah.
Gets suspended for the first half of a game. And then it was less than the previous one. And then he
Yeah.
goes to the NFL, add more money into it. He's in a position he doesn't want to be in Cleveland. All of a sudden, it's less of a football player. And then he came to Canada, and watching that documentary and having memories back to what it was in 2018 in Hamilton, I just thought to myself, he had mailed it in already.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get back. I don't even know what he was trying to get back. He
I
was
think he
just
was
maybe trying to
trying.
score a contract in the NFL
No, man.
where somebody could fix him.
I think he was trying to convince himself that he could write his own narrative at the end. That's what I think it was. I think he had an incomplete picture of himself in his mind, and he was trying to find a way to write the ending that he wanted because he wanted to be in control of his story because he wasn't in control of his story by the time that he got to A&M, or when people started talking about him, or people started writing about Johnny football, or people were writing about what he's going to be in the mock drafts, or talking about what he's going to be in the NFL, or how he's going to be with the Browns, or any of that stuff. I just feel like he wanted to try and control the end of his story, but he wasn't going to put the work in to actually control it. Like, that's the thing. Everything this dude does seems like it's fraudulent. That's my biggest takeaway, I think, from it all. It was just that it's like he wants something and he wants to show people things, but he can't really do what's required to actually show that. I should mention as well, this is crazy. In 20, I forget when it was. My dad and I went down on a baseball tour, and we went and saw a game in Pittsburgh. We saw a game in Cleveland. And my dad goes, "Do you want to go over to the Browns training camp?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure." We went to Berea, Ohio, Johnny Manziel's first Cleveland Browns training camp practice. We stood 10 feet away from him and watched him warm up with Connor Shaw and Brian Hoyer. So seeing the film and the footage of him in his Browns training camp, I'm like, oh my God, I was standing on the field at Berea when he did that. And 4 years later, I'm interviewing him as he gets debuted as the Hamilton Tiger Cats starting quarterback. But I want to squeeze this in here, Kyle, at the end, because this is my kind of my long lasting memory of this whole Manziel CFL saga. And I know that's why a lot of people would have come and listened to this podcast. Is not just two dudes breaking down a documentary. The Tiger Cats schedule that year at Calgary, they lost 28-14 in week 1 in 2018, right? So, and again, to your point about Dane Evans, and that was Bryant Moniz and Vernon Adams Jr. and Dane Evans and Johnny Manziel and Jeremiah Masoli. That was the 5 quarterbacks in camp that year. And I remember seeing like the review on the iPad where Luke Tasker and Jeremiah Masoli are looking over something seriously, and then Johnny starts laughing and slaps his leg and walks away. And he was just like, this game is so dumb and silly and ridiculous. So that's my memory from week one. Week two, they went on the road at Edmonton 38-21. They beat Winnipeg at home 31-17. Week four, okay, this is my long-lasting memory of this whole journey. They're playing at Saskatchewan. And in the pregame warm-up, I see the other quarterbacks, Dane and Jeremiah, working together and working through their rhythm and the routines that everybody got to know in 2019 and 21. And Johnny was just sprinting around the field in random directions, totally random. And he had picked a receiver, some guy on the practice roster or something, that he was sprinting around and just slinging it sidearm, 50 yards over there, 35 yards over here, behind the back pass, 25 yards over there. He wasn't even warming up. He was just being erratic and random and weird. I've never seen a quarterback warm up like this. And I'm standing at field level, and I went up to June Jones and I was like, what's going on? Why is he doing this? Why is he warming up? He goes, he's already missed a couple of meetings. And this is not to slander Johnny and anybody in the Tiger Cats organization, anybody in Montreal, but this is the takeaway I have from his entire time in the CFL. I asked June, what's going on? This is the weirdest warm-up I've ever seen. And he just said, he's missed a couple of meetings. I think we're going to have to trade him. Like, they're literally on the field warming up for a game. And June says to me, I don't think we can keep him. I don't think this is going to work out. I think he's the same dude that he's always been. I don't think I can fix him. I don't think we can make this any better. The next game, I'm up in the booth. Eric Tillman, at the time the general manager, comes up and he says, hey, guys, just so you know, if anything happens to Jeremiah here tonight, okay, and I don't want you to tell anybody about this, but just so you have the information to use at your disposal if it happens, if Jeremiah gets dinged tonight, Dane is going to go in as the backup. It's not a disciplinary thing. We just think that Dane deserves an opportunity to get some snaps. And it was Mike Morielli and I standing in the booth. We looked at each other like, the fuck? What are you talking about?
I remember this story that you told me.
It's like, what are you talking? Manziel's listed as the 2. I was like, I looked at Morielli. I go, dude, if Jeremiah gets hurt in this game, how the F do we explain Dane Evans coming into the football game? Like, as the people presenting that with our voices, how are we supposed to go, oh yeah, this is what you heard, but this is the real truth, and we've been told from the organization that it's not disciplinary, when it's like, it's very obvious that was very strange.
Yeah, and the thing that's crazy to me in a situation like that is, if it were to have happened and Johnny doesn't come out, how do you explain keeping him back to the fan base, or just you not explain it at all? You say Dane Evans deserves this opportunity, despite us making a freaking, a 10-month chase for Johnny Manziel. We had Kent Austin on every damn week. And Eric Burkhart, the only time he ever made SportsCenter, I remember, the only time he ever made SportsCenter, we had Kent Austin on during the height of, will Johnny come to the CFL? And it was after Eric Burkhart said, we are putting in this deadline. And I said, did you know about the deadline before he made that statement? And Kent Austin said, he made up that deadline. It doesn't mean anything.
Amazing.